Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Navid Moazzez, and welcome to another episode of the Lifestyle Architects. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Jantsch. He's a marketing consultant, speaker, and best-selling author of Duct Tape Marketing, Duct Tape Selling, and the Commitment Engine and Referral Engine. He's the creator of the Duct Tape Marketing System and the Duct Tape Marketing Consulting Network that trains and licenses small business marketing consultants around the world. So that's a little intro. I basically brought you on here because you came out with a really great book recently, Duct Tape Selling, which we are going to get into some concepts here today. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Definitely. So first, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you on to kind of write this book, Duct Tape Selling, in the first place.
Well, I think it's important to know I've actually had my own marketing consulting firm for over 25 years. So,
Yeah.
Duct Tape Marketing, my first book that you talked about, was really in a lot of ways the kind of the distillation of all the work I had done to that point in working with small to mid-sized businesses. And I really when it came to this duct tape marketing concept, out of a little bit of frustration of working with small business owners. I really enjoyed working with small business owners, but they were really in some ways more difficult to serve than larger organizations because they didn't have the same budgets and resources and even attention spans. And so I decided what I was going to do to solve that frustration was to create this system and call it duct tape marketing. I wanted to give it a brand or product type of name almost because the way I was viewing it was that I was going to basically turn marketing into a product, and where I could walk in into a prospect and say, here's what I'm going to do, here's what you're going to do, and here are the results we hope to get, and by the way, here's what it's going to cost. And it turned out it was pretty interesting. As I said, I started down that path to solve my own frustration. It turned out that actually solved a pretty great frustration for a lot of small business owners. It's actually difficult to buy marketing services in a comprehensive way. The large agencies that maybe do strategy work aren't interested in small, mid-sized businesses, and so consequently, a lot of small business owners resort to getting their marketing by way of a graphic designer or a PR person or a web person or an SEO person, and so for somebody to walk in and say, here's the entire way to view your marketing, and we're going to show you how to set up a marketing system, I think was very refreshing, and that kind of took off immediately. And that you alluded to in the intro. I now have a network of consultants around the world that use that same methodology, and a lot of my speaking and writing is really around that idea of a marketing system. Now, you had asked why, or maybe what's a little the backstory of this latest book, and in a way, it's it might be simple to think of it as just this is the companion to duct tape marketing, but it's really an evolution, I think, because I think both marketing and sales have changed so dramatically over the last 5 years because buying has changed so dramatically over the last 5 years, and so for me, I originally started out to write Duct Tape Selling as a book for that salesperson or independent marketer that was really dying these days. I mean, because there are no more phones to cold call and no more doors to knock down necessarily, and so they really had to start using some of these inbound tactics and using some of the things that marketers have been using, content and expertise and authority. And so what's been interesting about this is that obviously that salesperson that I was targeting, I think, has found that this book works for them. But I'm finding a lot of business owners and marketers telling me that this is really just the more personal way to market and sales, or at least the kind of the end-to-end connected way. And then, ironically, some leadership people in leadership at large sales organizations and large marketing organizations saying that this book is helping them bridge the gap to get marketing and sales on the same page. So it's been pretty interesting the way the book's been received.
Definitely. I mean, I love the book. When I listened to it, actually, the audiobook recently came out. So before this interview, but I want to get in, before we get into kind of the strategies in the book, I want to kind of, maybe there's a distinction. What's the difference between marketing and selling in the first place?
Well, I think the distinction used to be extremely clear. I think in organizations, marketing was in charge of the message, the brand, the positioning, and sales, or in many cases that led to also being in charge of lead generation. And sales was really always charged with being in charge of of selling, closing deals, the lead conversion function, but probably more importantly, the relationship as with the individual client as well was quite often held by an individual salesperson. I think that those lines have really blurred over the last few years, and I think organizations that still view it that way, that marketing's job is generate the lead, and once that lead score is high enough, they throw it over the wall to the salespeople to go out and close it. I think they are missing a great number of opportunities, because I alluded to the fact that buying has changed dramatically over the years, the last few years, and I even cite a CEB study of 2,200 B2B buyers, and 57% of them claim that they essentially made the decision about a company or a product or service that they were going to acquire before they ever even reached out to the company. So that company didn't even know they were looking. They certainly hadn't talked to a salesperson yet, but they had come to a conclusion or a decision about it, because we have access to so much information now that we're able to do that, I think. And so to me, what that message clearly suggests is that salespeople have to get involved in the customer's journey at a much earlier point. They have to start delivering and demonstrating value and showing that they're somebody who can provide insight before I even know I maybe have a challenge or start looking for what it is that they sell. And I think that's probably one of the key distinctions of marketing and sales now. There really is a tremendous overlap, and I'll throw service into that too. Obviously, I think that we can't forget that the salesperson's job is not done just because they close the deal. That if they're going to really be that superstar salesperson that I talk about in the subtitle, they have to realize that their job is to really be an advocate for their customer even after the deal is closed.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's maybe some elements of an excellent salesperson today, that they really have to get involved earlier on in the buyer process and maybe customer services you're saying here. But you also talk maybe in the first chapter here, listen, you really need to listen to what they are saying. I recently spoke to Ted Rubin, and he's like all about this return on relationship, that you really have to get in front of them and see what they actually want in the first place.
Yeah. What's kind of nice about that approach, though, too, is a lot of times the only way, years ago, the only way you were able to get in front of a prospect was to cold call them or to get an appointment, or, obviously you could send them letters and you could send them emails today, but now I think in a way you have a way to understand a prospect and to get involved earlier in their journey by just listening, as you talked about. So that idea that you're able to plug into somebody's network and you're able to see who influences them, what they're talking about, what their challenges are, what maybe their interests are that are not related to work. I mean, I just think all of the ability that we have now really allows you to do a much better job at understanding how you can show up in somebody's world or life and deliver value, even though you're really not even trying to sell them anything yet.
But then it comes down to kind of being clear over your buyer persona. I know you mentioned this in your book, and also kind of finding your value proposition as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a component. I mean, anybody in marketing would say, well, yeah, sure, or at least some percentage of them will say, yeah, sure, we need to develop those. We need to have a strong, positioning that differentiates us. But I think a lot of individual salespeople, if they're really being honest, they look at who they've sold over the years and what their best deals were over the years, they would probably be able to say, yeah, there's a certain type of buyer that I connect with. There is a certain type of challenge that a company is having that I know more about. I know how to solve. I've seen that deal before, and so I think that the reality is a lot of salespeople actually end up going out and generating a significant amount of their own leads anyway. So why not be targeting what I call ideal customers, and why not be able to start articulating and thinking about what's your own personal brand?
Yeah.
Because I think that's what's going to allow you to to stand out, to attract the right types of deals, and to not just simply be chasing anybody that seems to have a need.
That's what I want to get in more to today as well, with the kind of personal brand side of things and kind of how you build your reputation, positioning, and all this. But first, like with this kind of developing your value proposition or finding that, you talk about something in your book called, I think it's like talking logo, right?
Yeah.
And can you elaborate a little bit upon that?
Yeah, well, so it's a device I've been using for years, and it's just a very simple way, I think, for people to connect with what they really sell or what they really do. I think a lot of times when I use the question, so tell me what you do for a living. And most people's response is, well, I'm a salesperson, or I work for this kind of company, or here's my title. And obviously the buyer doesn't care about any of that, right? I mean, the buyer cares about, what are you going to do for me? How are you going to solve my problem? What do you do that's unique, that makes me really want to hear more, because I don't just need another salesperson in my life. And so the idea is that you then craft a much more compelling, sort of benefit-driven answer to that question, what you do for a living. And you've really got it right when somebody, it forces somebody to say, either because it's vague, or it's intriguing, or it's creative enough. It literally forces somebody to say, well, wow, tell me more about that. I think I use this example in the book. I know I've used it in my writing in the past. We had an architect over the years that their real point of differentiation was that they had a number of people on staff that were involved in city councils, on zoning boards, things like that. And so they really got very good at getting plans through red tape. How to get plans approved, how to know where the problems are going to be in this city, know who they had to actually convince that this was a good project, and so. We started hearing from their customers that what they did that was truly unique was that they helped them get paid faster. And this was, of course, their customers were all contractors. And once the plans got approved, the contractor got to start the work, and they got to make that first draw and start receiving money. And so in a lot of ways, what this architect did was, for a living, was they helped contractors get paid faster. And boy, I tell you, a contractor asked one of their architects what they did for a living, and they would say that, and they had to say, well, tell me how you do that, because that's one of my greatest challenges. So that's the idea behind the actual talking logo. But the real point of the exercise, you may never come up with something that you actually use at a networking event or something. But the real point of the exercise is to get you to better understand what the buyer really buys from you. It's not the well-designed building. Those are, that was for our architect, that was an expectation. But that difference maker was really that they were able to get plans approved faster, which led to the contractor getting paid faster.
Definitely. I mean, I just thought it was interesting. That's why I wanted to bring it up here. But with kind of when we go into building our reputation and kind of the personal brand side of things in this space, if someone is listening now, where can they get started with that? It's like when they are starting from scratch, what's some steps they can take to kind of build their reputation?
Well, the first place that I always have people start, and this isn't really building your reputation, but you want to make sure that you're building it the right way, that you're focused on the right things. The first thing I always tell people to do is sit down, and obviously this applies to somebody that has customers, but sit down with half a dozen of those, particularly find those customers that you're thinking, gosh, I wish I had more of them, that type of customer, and just sit down and interview them, ask them. A series of questions about why they chose you, what you do that's different, where they look for information. I mean, just find out as much as you can in a conversation, and don't let them just tell you, oh, you provide better service, because obviously that's not very useful. You want to get at how you provide better service, or even better yet, get them to tell stories about a time when you provided better service, because you want to have a really deep understanding of your value proposition of what you do that's unique, or maybe even and this is a really interesting point, I think, or opportunity for a lot of salespeople, is a lot of times salespeople or entrepreneurs will develop a process or a methodology that really allows them to deliver a result, allows them to understand the customer better, then deliver a result. And they don't think of it as a process. It's just, hey, this is how you provide good service. And I have had many times where we've been able to uncover a very valuable methodology or process that somebody has developed, and we will really document the heck out of that and make that kind of their point of view and their methodology. In a lot of cases, that is probably one of the best ways to stand out. Everybody talks about the end product or the end service or whatever it is, but in most cases, what people really care about is how you get them there, and that can be a tremendous point of differentiation. And that in many cases, we've been able to uncover that by doing these same interviews. So to me, that's really the first place. You have to develop kind of your point of differentiation, your point of view that you're going to go out there and say, our way is the way, and that you really then build everything around, from that point, develop your expertise around your point of differentiation or your unique way of doing business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And before we move on here, we can also get into a little bit about, I know you've done this extremely well. I mean, you've positioned yourself as the go-to person in your space, and that also builds authority and obviously premium positioning, which I've been talking about recently on the show quite a bit. I had Nick Reese on. We covered this. I think it's a very fascinating topic on how you can build this up. So how can someone do this from scratch and kind of position themselves as the go-to person?
Right. So the first thing is we just talked about that point of view, that methodology that really clearly differentiates you. I created and started talking about marketing as a system, which by itself was actually a pretty unique point of view. But then that system had 7 very distinct points. Strategy before tactics was kind of our starting mantra, and so we then take that point of view. First off, we write an ebook about it. Then we start take each of those topics and for an entire month maybe write about that topic in different ways, have guest posts about that topic, have podcasts about that topic. And so really kind of build this much larger body of work around our very set point of view. And I think that's, I know everybody wants the magic bullet and they want to instantly be branded as an authority. But I'll tell you that, the biggest thing we did is in building duct tape marketing is, again, we stuck to this point of view, but then we did it over and over and over and over again. I mean, I've been writing about some of these same topics in different ways, and obviously different approaches, but for 8-10 years now, and I think that's the part that I think sometimes people underestimate. They want to write 4 or 5 blog posts and instantly be seen as an authority. And I mean, I personally have written over 3,000 blog posts, and I will tell you that very few of those strayed from my topic, and it's very intentional in terms of not just producing this large body of work, but this body of work that about 50% of our traffic is search engine driven. I mean, because people are out there finding ridiculously, in some cases, posts from 2004 and 2005, that are showing up very high for very specific search terms. And so, you really do have to build that foundation, because it a lot of this. Becoming an authority or an expert isn't something that you get to anoint yourself as. It's something that some subset of the market decides you're the go-to person, and it's producing content. I mean, obviously our content then has blown up into books. I've written 4 books. Though obviously that that takes you to another level of authority if those books sell well. Obviously, that you show up in places like this and you get invited to speak at events, and that raises the bar even more. But for me, a lot of it started with just the simple act of intentional blogging. In other words, before we set out and just said, okay, it's Monday, I need to write something. I mean, we had a very editorial approach to it. I mean, we said, okay, over the next year, here are the topics we are going to make sure that we're covering. And we even I developed something and use something with clients now I call the total content system, and we actually help them develop an annual plan that's going to involve 12 themes, and that doesn't mean that's the only thing they get to write about that month, but it's the focus for the month, and it really helps them plan out the long-term approach. And if I didn't say it enough yet, I'll say it again. I mean, this authority building and expert building really comes about from a long-term view. First, it comes out with having a point of view that's a little bit different than everybody else, but then sticking to it. And I think that's another challenge for a lot of people is everybody wants to rush in and become known as this authority. So they say, oh, here's a good idea, and they abandon one good idea after another every 60 days. I mean, I've been podcasting since 2005, and I mean, the millions and millions of people have come and gone in podcasting, in that period of time. And I think hopefully that's another key ingredient to this, is that people realize it's a you're building an asset. And that's the component that you need to focus on. And it takes hard work. Now, the payoff, of course, is that I'm able to charge 10 times what I used to charge for consulting, and certainly for speaking. In some cases now, I'm able to charge what still feels to me like a ridiculous amount of money for getting up and talking for 60, 90 minutes. But I will honestly say that there are times that I'll be the first to tell you I may not really have anything that's that more brilliant to say than a lot of other people. But because I'm perceived as an expert, I'm seen as a best-selling author. They can hold that tangible thing up that says, look, other people think he's smart. It allows you to command those higher fees. And I'll flatly say it, whether you deserve it or not. But it's people get paid more for increased perceived value.
Yeah, and I love what you just said. You brought up some very good points here, because I always tell my clients and people that follow me that kind of building authority or a strong personal brand online is definitely not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we're in this for a long run. And you said you've been blogging since 2004, right?
Actually, August of 2003, I think, is when.
Okay, even yeah. So I mean, and you put out a lot of content. You have written a lot of like ebooks. I saw on your website. You can download them if you sign up to your email list. There's a lot of great content. So what's kind of your approach to this? Like, as you said, you create with intention, with purpose when you actually create the content. So let's get into this a little bit. And that's why you have the expert platform, which is a blog.
Yeah, and so I kind of talked about our overall editorial approach, which is to create those themes. But then the other part, and this isn't necessarily, I mean, this is the reason to build a platform is because it allows you to sell more, right? Yeah. Depending upon what you want to do, whether it's to be a professional speaker or it's just to get clients to call you so you have an opportunity to tell them about what you can do for them. And so in addition to just to having that editorial approach so that you know that you're writing the right topics or we might even call them the right keyword phrases that you're writing about. But you also have to think in terms of actual intention for your content. So you need not just more content, you need content that obviously creates awareness. You need content that builds trust. You need content that educates. I mean, that tells once somebody says, okay, these people seem to write a lot of really good stuff, and there's other people talking about them, and they've got great reviews from their customers, but how would this work for me? You need that kind of how-to content. I think you need to constantly be thinking about how do we get our clients, customers, prospects, users, readers, whatever term you want to use for it, how do we get them involved in producing content and sharing content? And finally, you need to think long and hard about content that converts. I think a lot of people, especially in this social media driven world, think in terms of, oh, all we need to do is produce stuff that people will share, and that'll get us a lot of hits, and that'll get us a lot of likes, and that'll get us a lot of notoriety. But in the end, once somebody comes down through all, consuming your content, goes on that journey, I mean, you want to have the ability to then say, hey, here's how this would work for you. Here's what we charge for this service. Here's why that service is worth that value. And I think that's a place where a lot of content marketers and a lot of organizations in general think, okay, that's just the job of the sales team. But that sales team, or just, your website needs to also have that content that is going to specifically lay out how something's going to work for me. It's funny, a lot of people react very negatively to this idea of selling in social media, and the same way that you might in email, and if you do all the steps to guide people down that journey, you're actually, and then you don't ask for the order, I think you're actually doing them a disservice. And so I don't, when people say you can't sell on social media, what they mean is if you haven't developed trust, if you haven't built a relationship, no, you can't sell in social media. But I don't know that you could sell anywhere where you don't have a relationship, a trust, or permission, as our friend Seth Godin, coined years ago. So as long as you still gain those elements, you can sell anywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, a very important metric, at least for me, and I think for like a lot of marketers today, like it's email marketing. We should not focus all our efforts maybe on the social media, because we don't own those people. They are on Facebook, they are on Twitter. But what's your take on kind of email marketing, and how do you use this to kind of guide as you said, your potential buyers, through this journey?
Yeah. Well, so I am, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been in this long enough that I was building my business online before we even used the word social media, and so building an email list has always been an essential element of marketing. I mean, it just makes complete sense. You can write the greatest content in the world that attracts somebody one time, who goes away basically saying, well, that was pretty smart. But if you capture that email address, or you give them exchange in value they want to give you that email address, well, now maybe you can make that same impression week in, week out. All of my business, I would say, at every level, from the $29 sale to the $50,000 sale, has probably involved email marketing in some element. And even if that element was just keeping my name in front of somebody, and to the point where they made the decision to become one of my consultants or something, and so. It's an essential element, but I'll give this caveat that I do whenever I talk about online elements, is that it's really integration, I think, of all the elements that makes these work. If you simply go out there and say, I'm going to build this massive email list, but you don't really have great content, you're probably not going to keep anybody on that massive email list. And if you're participating in social media, or I should say, if you're not participating in social media, you're giving up a tremendous opportunity to create awareness about your email list. I tell people all the time that one of the greatest uses of paid advertising today is to drive people to your content, and that content then gives them the opportunity to give you your email address. And I think that I have used and am still a big promoter of Facebook advertising. But that's how I use it. So I've built a pretty large audience on Facebook, and I'm now advertised to the friends of my friends, so to speak. But I drive them to content, and that content is hopefully good enough that they want to give me their email address. And so from that point, we have a pretty good idea of what percentage of those folks will actually become customers of some sort.
Definitely. But we can get into maybe some other tips as well, how someone can grow their email list. Maybe you have some tools you are using for this as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you want to make sure that you do is without being obnoxious. It's pretty easy to be obnoxious too. But if you start writing content and you are driving people to, I mean, people are finding your content, they're sharing your content. You want to make sure that if somebody gets to the end of an article, for example, a blog post, I mean, I mean, the simple things like putting an email capture, box on every page on your sidebar on your website or something is pretty standard fare. But I think you have to also realize that some percentage of your traffic, I know in my case, it may be 30 or 40% of my traffic, comes in through, say, one blog post that they found. And they're not necessarily exposed to my whole site or everything that we're doing. They really were interested in that one piece of content. And so we do a couple things. At the end of that blog post, we have a plugin that shows them 4 or 5 other pieces of content that are very related to that. And we see the metrics all the time that those related pieces of content get clicked on. So now they've read, 2 pieces of content or 3 pieces of content. Maybe now they're starting to say, this person's really good. And so they get to the end of all of those blog posts, and we say, hey, you don't want to miss a single one of these. Sign up here. And so having that at the end of all of our content, doesn't really matter, what type of content it is, but making sure that you're there when they're thinking about consuming more of your content. A very controversial list building practice. It's not even that controversial. But it's one that people like to talk about a lot, and that is, some form of pop over, pop under, pop up, whatever you want to call it, type of box. So you visit a page and you're reading for a little bit, and then 3 or 4 seconds into it, this thing says, "Hey," it takes over your screen, says, "You want to get this free content? Subscribe here." And if we had an audience right now watching this live, and we were able to ask 10, 20, 30 of them what they thought of those. If we asked 30, 29 people would say they hate them. They would never subscribe to anything that had such, evilness on it. Yeah. And yet, test after test shows that those, from a business standpoint, anywhere from 300 to 2,000% increase in collection of email addresses. So even though everybody says they hate them, they still use them. They still subscribe that way. And in instances where somebody will complain, I'll say, okay, I'll take the thing down for a while. Our email subscriptions just plummet. Yeah. And now there's some really smart things you can do too. I mean, again, going back to, I've been doing this for a long time, and I mean, they're some of the original versions of those things were so obnoxious, and you'd close one and another one would pop up, and you'd try to be leaving and it wouldn't let you leave. It was just ridiculous, some of the stuff that some of the early internet marketers did. But now they're much more elegant from a design standpoint and from a function standpoint. I mean, they know if you've been on my site in the last 60 days that you don't want to see that pop up again, perhaps. Or they know that if you click to maybe 3 pages, there's a really good chance you'd like to see that pop up. You're interested in the content, but so you don't have to have these things that immediately take over somebody's screen the second they get there. I mean, I see a lot of them are triggered by exit intent. So if somebody is thinking about leaving, or it looks like they're thinking about leaving, it might say, "Hey, before you go, here's something you might consider." Or some of them are timed by scrolling. So if somebody scrolls down a page pretty far, they obviously are reading and consuming the content. There's a pretty good chance that maybe they would like to subscribe. So for all of you people that say you hate those out there, I would just tell you, try it and test your results. I mean, you may get 4 or 5 people that are perturbed, but you're going to get 50 or 100 that are going to subscribe.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and they work. I use a plugin called Opt-in Monster, and when you go to the corner, of my site, I mean, I'm gonna trigger this because they recently did this. So when you try to leave the site, actually this pops up, and there's some other plugins as well. But what's some tools that you use in your business that really helps you be efficient with your brand?
Well, I would say probably, and if we're going to get into particularly some of the social media tools, I mean, one of the things that, the first chapter of Duct Tape Selling was is all about listening. And some of my favorite tools are really some of the ones that make it very easy for me to listen. And so things like Talkwalker is a tool that I use, and I just set up alerts, and I get a daily email that tells me, when my brands have been talked about, or really anything I want to put in there. Another one, because they seem to catch different alerts, is a tool called Mention. So I use those every day. If there are phrases I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to, obviously brand mentions that I want to pay attention to. I also use Hootsuite, probably the most well-known social media management tools, but it allows me to look at LinkedIn and Facebook and Google Plus and Twitter and just monitor my own streams all from one place. But there again, I constantly tell people, create lists of customers, create lists of prospects in Twitter, and so it's just very easy for you to scan. Create lists of influencers. A lot of people follow 25,000 people on Twitter. Well, that's not very useful in terms of being able to actually pay any attention to anything. So if you're one of those people that's following lots of people, make sure that you're slicing and dicing your list in, say, Hootsuite, so that you can make sure that those 10 journalists that write about your business or industry or in your town, you're able to very quickly see what they've written today and then move on. I use a tool called Feedly. And it's just an RSS reader. There are dozens of them. I happen to kind of like that one, but there are many that provide the same service. But effectively, I subscribe to at least a couple hundred blogs. And what Feedly does is it goes out there and gets all the new content and brings it to one page. Like most of these apps that we use today, there are mobile versions of all of the apps as well. And so I'm able to not only get inspiration when I'm trying to think of ideas to write about and learn about, and that's another element. I mean, I'm constantly learning about new tools from some of these writers as well. But it also is kind of my go-to for stuff to share. So if I want to put, I do a weekly newsletter, for example, and I do obviously promote some of our own content that we've written during the week, but I also will put 4 or 5 little snippets in there of articles that I've written from other people. And it does a couple things. It makes creating the email newsletter much faster. And easier. I'm not writing all that content. People get it, and they like the fact that I've picked out hand selected 5 or 6 articles that I think that they should read, and those we give full attribution to the writer. We link back to their site. So guess what happens? They start seeing traffic from me, and they start sharing my content, and they start linking to my content. And so there are really some tremendous ideas, or tremendous reasons, I should say, to make sure that sharing other people, finding other people's content, using other people's content, and sharing it is part of your routine. And so I also use that same tool, Hootsuite, or even just in my phone using Feedly. I typically share 8 or 10, 12 pieces of content in social streams as well. I believe that my followers, that's one of the things they have come to appreciate as an activity from me, and so I'll even use another tool called Buffer. That has become very popular because it allows me to go into Feedly and say, oh, here are 10 great pieces of content, but I don't want them all to go out right now. I want them to go out throughout the day, and so Buffer, just as the name implies, buffers them out throughout the course of the day for me. So those are some of my favorites. I think also I'll throw in one more category. I think it's another great way for you to stand out, to provide value. Let's say you're a salesperson and you have 3 or 4 different industries that maybe you call on. You can use a tool like Scoop It, which allows you to curate content and actually build custom pages. So you could build pages about a very specific aspect or problem in your industry. You could actually build pages that just cover kind of the greatest hits of of people talking about a certain industry, and you can build these pages and Scoop It and then just I think you actually have the ability to almost create custom content for, say, a prospect or an industry maybe that you call on. And again, it's using other people's content, but you're just bringing it together, maybe providing some additional insight or relating it to a client or prospect's industry or challenge, but I think that's one of the master skills I think for salespeople today is to take the fact that their customers, even from their company, maybe their company's putting out too much content, that for them to actually act as a filter and as maybe somebody that aggregates some of the best content and really helps a prospect or a customer consume maybe what they need to consume rather than just saying, yeah, here are 5 ebooks, which one do you want?
Yeah, definitely. And also like this, what you're saying, like sharing other people's content can really, especially when you're starting out, maybe building your brand authority, sharing like influencers' content, going to their blog, maybe leaving a thoughtful comment, that can really help. Another tool I throw in here is Twitter feed actually. That I can just set it up so every time an influencer publish or a blog I really trust what they're doing, it goes out automatically. I mean, a lot of people, they don't like this with automatic publishing, but this is actually, if I like something, why not share all of their content when they publish? So that's a tool I use to be a little more efficient as well.
And I'd add to I would add to this what we're doing today. Frankly, one of the things that has been extremely valuable in helping elevate my brand when I first got started was the fact that I would find people that were influential already, and rather than sending them an email and saying, hey, I'd like to pick your brain for 20 minutes, I would send them an email and say, hey, I see you have a new book coming out. I'd like to interview you and have you as a guest on my podcast. And in addition to creating what I believe was very, very valuable content, it gave me tremendous access to some of the people that I really wanted to be seen with. I really wanted to have access to, and consequently, many of the names of people that are the best-selling authors and thinkers and marketers today have been on my podcast, and many of them now consider me a colleague, at least, if not a friend.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought this up with podcasting. And I mean, otherwise, I wouldn't be able to speak to many of the people I've had on my show so far. Some really great authors like yourself, come on here, because I have a show I can maybe show you to my audience as well. So that's also for someone like me who's coming up, building my brand by association a little bit, like associating myself with great people builds your authority in a very profound way.
Yeah, and I don't limit your thinking on this idea to famous authors or whatever that that you see other people doing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with interviewing people in your industry that have insightful things to say. I've even gone as far as having some of my clients reach out and interview prospects, but they didn't say, I want to interview you because you're a prospect. They said, hey, here's a company we'd really like to have access to. Let's interview their CEO. That started the conversation. And quite frankly, that can be a great way to get on somebody's radar. Obviously, you've got to have something that is valuable to them and worth their time and worth their reason for speaking with you. But think in terms, change your mindset about how you don't have the tool, the tactic works when you take that mindset. You don't have to use it exactly the same way you see everybody else doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And before we end here, I want to get into a really interesting concept that was in your book. Maybe you can go into some strategies on this. You talk about something you call build your sales hourglass and sales versus marketing hourglass, essentially. So can you get into this a little bit here?
Well, the whole idea of the hourglass, it borrows heavily certainly from the funnel that everybody's probably used to, but it changes it around a little bit because the funnel is so focused on get a bunch of people in the top of that thing and drive them through and close the deal, and in a lot of ways that's where it ends. And what I'm suggesting is that point at which you close the deal is where maybe another important phase starts, and that you need to immediately start focusing on the customer experience and getting them a result and really building them or kind of creating this community of customers, because that's how you're going to ultimately get your leads and your referrals. Is by creating a great customer experience, by creating happy customers. And so, the hourglass shape or metaphor then kind of talks about how that small point at which somebody becomes a client that then branches back out and expands in your business, much like the shape of an hourglass. And so the 7 stages of the marketing hourglass that I've been using for years, and what the suggestion here is that what you're doing is guiding a journey. You're, instead of creating demand strictly, you're kind of organizing behavior that people want to do, and those behaviors are know, like, trust, try, buy, repeat, and refer. And so, that concept has been, universally accepted. People write about it all the time. I mean, some, large consulting firms now I see are starting to use that terminology, which obviously is a big compliment. But when writing this book, what I wanted to suggest was that marketing hourglass, exists, but in a lot of organizations, sales is only involved in that try-buy, kind of that middle of it. And so what the sales hourglass is really something that kind of overlays. I mean, marketing is still going to create the brand and the message. I mean, in a healthy organization, I think that function still needs to exist. But a salesperson, particularly, or the sales department, the sales manager, needs to craft their own process. That when somebody when somebody starts down that path, that journey, how does a salesperson integrate in that journey at an earlier point? How do they start helping deliver value and helping clients discover what their real challenges are, and then collaborate with them on maybe building a solution, even if that solution isn't something you've got right out of your catalog. I mean, it might be something that you need to bring in other partners with, and that then you can ultimately design the perfect solution with a client. And again, that approach is something that's meant to be very flexible. It won't work in every single instance, but that creating that process, that intentional process, is how I think how you create kind of this seamless integration between sales and marketing.
Oh, definitely. I mean, other than your own book, obviously, Duct Tape Selling, do you have? I mean, you've been in this space for a very long time. So what's like your maybe top book, if we are talking about this kind of stuff, people can maybe pick up as well in addition to yours?
Yeah, there's been a very popular book for the last couple of years that many people, if you go on Amazon, you'll see it's people, how they have the people who like this book also bought this book, and it's called the Challenger Sale, and a lot of people have suggested that what I talk about in my book is a really great companion to that book. I think there is Jill Conrath's books, I think, are great. Snap Selling is one, and she just came out with a new book called Agile Selling. I think those are a couple good ones. I would also recommend, and he kind of crosses over marketing and sales in this book, in my opinion, Michael Port's book Solid.
Book Yourself Solid. Yeah, that's a great one.
Solid is another great book as well.
Definitely. So where can people find out more about you and pick up a copy of Duct Tape Selling?
Well, so the easiest place is at ducttapemarketing.com, and that's DUCTTAPE marketing.com. Obviously, everything we sell can be found there. Everything we give away can be found there. You can buy Duct Tape Selling at really any of the online and offline stores. There is a digital version, a Kindle version. There is an audio version as well in this book. So a number of formats. We do actually have a site that we set up just for the book, so you can really find, if you really want to go deeply into some of the content from the book, it's at ducttapeselling.com as well.
Definitely, and I'll link up everything over at the show notes at navid.me/43. So any final words here to my audience?
I need to get better at answering those kinds of questions. I have a tendency to just kind of like say everything that I meant to say, during the interview. But I think probably the biggest thing I would have to say is if you get my book or really probably any of the books out there today that we talked about, you're going to get into this thing and you're going to immediately say, gosh, there's so much I have to do now. And I think that probably my biggest advice is to determine, if you plan to be around, say 6 months or a year from now, doing what you're doing, then you need to look at it as you're building an asset. And that asset might take an investment on your part. I mean, you think of people in careers that go back to and get advanced degrees at night and things. I think that's how, in some ways, how entrepreneurs and salespeople need to think about it. Is that if you build that asset long term, it is going to pay off for you, and you probably are going to have to put in the time and energy to do so.
Definitely, it comes down to what I've said so many times before. Kind of, it's definitely not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we're in this for a long run. So thanks so much, John, for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It was great.